So now that we've looked at the political history of the Muromachi period, let's look at some literature. Poetry becomes a very, very important um, cultural influence during the Muromachi period. Again, it continues to be. And during this period, a new type of poetry developed. It's called renga. Okay, and renga is basically a fancy word for multiple waka. It's linked verse. So somebody would write one waka, and then the next person would continue. They would add on to the waka, and another person would add on to the waka. So it's multiple waka linked together. So they would have the same topic, and then they would keep taking turns between writing poems to continue about this topic until they finish, or they just come to a dead end, writer's block. Actually, in 1488, three poets linked 100 waka poems together until they had to stop. They just ran, into a dead end. So they actually have this in the U.S. There's like clubs that do this. You'll write poems, and then each person will take turns until you have to stop. I'm not personally interested in it, but maybe if it's for you, you could try it out. So even though the Muromachi period had a lot of fighting, and it was famous for a lot of fighting and internal divide, civil war, it was also a time for traditional arts of Japan being created. So many things that we now identify as being traditionally Japanese were created during the Muromachi period. And these cultural achievements were mostly derived from Zen Buddhism, influence from Zen, which was really growing and flowering during the Muromachi period. So these were very, very greatly appreciated by samurai and aristocrats alike, because now these two cultures are uniting into one. So the first one is No theater. Okay, you might have heard of No. It is a traditional Japanese performing art. And it's a traditional Japanese stage play. It's often compared to Greek drama, okay, Greek tragedies. So you have an actor on stage, always a man, and even the man can play female roles, but it's always in No theater it has to be a man. He wears a mask, different types of masks depending on the role he's playing, and he sings out the poetry that is part of the script while he slowly dances on the stage. And I'll put a video of a sample of No theater for you to watch on the Canvas course website. No themes are often supernatural. So they are ghost stories, or they deal with Buddhist themes, traditional themes, what happens after death, a lot of ghost stories, supernatural stories. And, very slow, very somber. The aristocrats and the imperial family loved No theater. And there were two famous No performers, Kanami and Zeami. They were a father and son team who performed in many, many No plays during the Muromachi. So this is an example of a No performer. Behind him, you have accompaniment on drums, and then you have people chanting the poetry that is the script. Very slow and somber, and it goes very slowly because the theme is supernatural. Okay. And the masks will change depending on the role that is being played by the No performer. Okay. Sometimes a demon, sometimes an animal, sometimes a woman in the case of the left side mask. So the mask really determines everything in No theater. The second big cultural influence during the Muromachi period is Zen rock gardens. I'm sure if you've ever been to a Japanese garden, you've seen these types of rock gardens. Before Zen became popular in Japan, gardens were supposed to be green, lush, full of flowers, full of greenery, because they were supposed to resemble the Pure Land. Okay, so for aristocrats, if they wanted to know what the Pure Land was like, they would build these gardens to remind them of what was waiting for them in the afterlife. But the Zen rock gardens came when Zen Buddhism was introduced to Japan, and so the rock garden isn't lush. It's basically very austere. You have rocks placed inside at different places in the middle of raked white sand. So this is supposed to be very, very simple, and it's called wabi-sabi in Japanese. It's very, very appreciated in Zen Buddhism because it's supposed to be very understated and subtle. The beauty is in what is understated, not in something glitzy and glamorous, but in something very simple and understated, okay, very conservative. And the whole point of this is they believe that the very simple look of this rock garden is supposed to relax somebody before they can be in a meditative state. So it's very useful in Zen Buddhism. And the most famous rock garden in all of Japan is in Ryoanji Temple in Kyoto. It's pictured here. There's beautiful rock gardens all over Japan. You could see some here too if you go to a Japanese garden. But Ryoanji temples, it's a Zen temple, of course, has the most beautiful rock garden. And it's supposed to induce meditative state. The third cultural influence, black and white painting. Okay, this becomes popular during the Muromachi period. And this is also an influence of Zen Buddhism because instead of painting with colors, it was thought that black and white painting was more simpler, right? Zen, their main goal is to make things more simple, more understated, and flashy. So black and white painting is considered more simple, so it's a big tenet of Zen Buddhism to induce a meditative state. Okay? And calligraphy becomes popular during the Muromachi period for the same reason. The most famous artist of black and white painting was known as Sesshu. He was a Zen Buddhist monk, of course, and he studied in China during one of the missions, right, which are now happening again. So he's very famous for painting landscapes. But guess what? No color, only black ink. But even though he only used black ink, his paintings are beautiful, and many of them are depicted on hanging scrolls that were owned by the Ashikaga shoguns, by the imperial family. This is an example of Sesshu's landscape work. And look, not a single color, but look how real it is, right? And it's very, very heavily influenced by Chinese style painting. If you look at Chinese artwork from this period, it looks almost identical. This is a picture of a tiger that Sesshu painted. Actually, there's a story that when Sesshu was a child, he loved, drawing and painting when he was a young student in the Buddhist monastery. So Sesshu would always escape from meditation and go draw. And one day, the master of the temple basically ties Sesshu up and leaves him in a room. He ties his hands behind his back so he cannot draw. And he says, you know what, you're going, you stay here until you learn your lesson. You're not going to be drawing anymore. So when he comes back at night, he sees this huge rat on the floor in front of Sesshu. And he gets scared, the Zen priest. He says, oh my gosh, there's a big rat on the floor. What have you done? Let's kill him before he gets to Sesshu. But when he goes closer, he notices this is actually a painting. Sesshu painted it with his feet. Remember, his hands are tied, so he somehow got a brush and painted this rat on the floor with his toes. And so finally the Zen priest said, you're a genius. You just go study painting in China. Go study art in China. We don't know if the story is true, but it's kind of an anecdote attributed to Sesshu's life. The fourth important cultural influence is the tea ceremony. I'm sure you've all heard of the tea ceremony, and we can thank Zen Buddhism for tea ceremony. Okay? Because when the missions to China were reopened and Zen influence comes in from China, along with Zen Buddhism, lots of Chinese tea goods were imported to Japan from China. And so the tea ceremony develops, and I'll put a video of this up as well. It's basically a ceremony where people are invited into a small tea room. They sit down on tatami straw mats, right? And someone will make green tea for them. And the important part is not the tea, okay? It's the whole ritual, it's the whole ceremony associated with the tea ceremony. How you place the tea bowl, how you mix the powdered green tea, how you drink the tea. This is all very important, very crucial to the ceremony. Okay, so you're not supposed to just sit and have tea and chat. You don't really talk during this process. You observe the tea being made for you, and you drink it slowly and you enjoy it. It's supposed to help with, again, right before meditation. So I will show you a clip of this as well. And the architecture of the tea rooms was very important, right? You had sliding doors with rice paper covering it. You have tatami mats on the floor. And the tea rooms essentially develop into what we now consider traditional Japanese architecture. So example, the tatami mats, right? The hanging scroll in the back, the sliding doors, these all developed in the tea rooms in Kyoto. And now we associate them with traditional Japanese culture. So again, the tea ceremony is also thanks to Zen Buddhism. Okay. And finally, ikebana, or flower arrangement, is also something developed during the Muromachi period. It's basically putting together beautiful decorations of flowers to make a beautiful design. Again, nothing too glitzy, nothing too glamorous, but it's the understated tones that make it beautiful and acceptable to the Japanese. And again, all of this is derived from Zen Buddhism. You can see this is a sample of ikebana. And they have ikebana contests even here in LA. So we have these 5 cultural influences. Key point: all of them are derived from Zen, because in Zen, being simple, austere, which is what we call wabi-sabi, right? It's more important, it's more acceptable than glitzy, glamorous art, right? So that's the key. It's not making it so glitzy and flashy, but rather simple, understated. That's where the beauty really lies. So thanks to the bad policies, horrible policies of the Ashikaga shogunate, the country is in a constant state of civil war for most of the Muromachi period, with the government and the daimyo fighting against, the government is not doing anything to stop the daimyo from fighting against each other, right? The shogun and emperor refuse to do anything, so the daimyo warrior clans in each province basically rule over their provinces as mini independent regions, right? There's no central government. But even though this was a negative part of it, some of the most traditional, beautiful aspects of Japanese culture that are well known to the world, like tea ceremony, the rock gardens, flower arrangement, they were all created and developed during the Muromachi period.